audio on that off. Greetings, everybody. We're doing a few final tweaks here, and then hopefully you will be able to see and hear us. All right, I think we've got it good. Awesome.
It's still a little bit behind.
What the delay is fine. It's the lag that I don't want. So, all right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Aaron Simmons. This is my co-host Bryan Bibb. I'm a philosopher. He is a scholar of the Hebrew Bible, and for the sakes of our conversation, at least, a theologian, though he denies it whenever I call him that. And today is episode 2 of God Hates Us All Radio. And today we're going to focus on the idea of evil, the devil, hell, all kinds of fun things that will scare your parents and cause your grandma to pray even harder. So the episode today is simply titled "The Devil is Real," a citation to that wonderful Kreator song, "Satan is Real." So Bryan, thanks so much for joining me again, man. This is awesome to be back together.
Oh, it's been great. I had a good time editing our first episode, which is ready.
Nice.
So we'll be adding a link to the podcast version of the first episode.
Fantastic.
And it has the music clips in it, but it's only like 30 seconds.
Right. So we can get around copyright.
Even that is dicey, but I think we can give it a shot.
We'll see what happens.
So my other idea was we could, on the original playlist, on the original video, add it to a playlist that has links to the songs.
Yeah.
So that people who are watching, and like maybe we could upload the podcast version with those things. So it's like a package.
Oh, cool.
Cleaned up. It's got some of the
okay.
mistakes taken out of it. And everything.
No, it sounds good. And
turned out pretty good, I think.
Well, and for anybody on YouTube for the live stream, we encourage you to drop comments in the chat. We can see those, and so that way we can chat with you and think with you as we talk together today. And the YouTube live stream that's without editing, so it is more like a Twitch than anything more robust.
It's like if you were in our class and we were just shooting a breeze. That's right. What you would get.
That's right. Well, we're so glad that you can join us today. The first episode has done actually quite well on YouTube, which is a little bit of a surprise, but also very rewarding. Several hundred folks have checked it out. And so we're hoping that when we launch this then officially on the RSS feeds, it'll be available on Spotify and Apple Tunes and other places that will discover an even bigger audience. And so, yeah, glad you were the cool kids on the block who knew about it before anybody else did. So, exactly. All right. So today, Bryan, we are picking up from something that you said last time, kind of toward the end of the episode. You were like, we really should think about the way that the devil and evil show up, not as necessarily like ontological accounts of some being that exists and is doing certain things, though there are some, and we're going to talk about them, some musicians that hold that view, and there's also thinkers that hold that view in the tradition. But it's more so in metal music, metaphors, allegories, and in many ways manifestations of the frustration with human failure and human unkindness and what we can do to each other, the inhumanity of man. And so in order to think about that, the episode is focusing on these dark themes. But to start off, why is it that you think these are so common in metal music in a way that, like, if we think about, I personally think most of pop music is evil, but it's not necessarily focused on the themes of evil or the dark side of humanity. And yet, the same thing when we talk about country music or we talk about hip hop, all of these ideas are there. But when we think about metal, it becomes almost part of the aesthetic. It's like part of the culture. Why do you think it's so ingrained in that way?
Good question. I do think it's worth acknowledging up front that the single most famous song about the devil is a country song.
Right? It's true.
Because he's going to Georgia.
He's going to Georgia
for some reason.
I personally think it's to go watch the Bulldogs play, because I imagine the devil hangs out there a lot. Yes, that's right. Okay. As a Florida State fan, I've just lost all of our Georgia listeners.
Well, yeah. So I think I would say 2 reasons. First, you can look at the growth of cult imagery in European metal. Right. You see Black Sabbath sort of pulling some of it, but it's also happening in Scandinavia and in Germany. So some of the early sort of dark kind of black metal type folks, these are drawing on this dark occult satanic imagery, I think it's part of a critical response to the power of Christendom in European history. So you have this idea that, the Christians come with the Roman Empire, eventually sort of overrunning Europe.
Yeah.
And then here we are now, in late modernity. And is there some cultural power that might push back against the church and that might establish, our independence? And so I think some of that is reaching back to pagan traditions and sort of lifting up, a lot of those, sort of Norse kind of things, whatnot. And I think identifying specifically with Satan, I think, is a way of taking what Christianity had given them and then turning it around and using it against Christianity as a critical tool, I think. And some of it is on the surface, kind of like we talked last week about how some metal songs will just be right up front about here's the things that suck about society. But some of it is just a cultural response or cultural reaction. It's like, no, we are not conforming to this. And we are, we're going to go into the woods and paint our faces white and black and listen to this stuff and sing about Satan, because we're not doing that. And famously, a few of them went and burned down some churches, in Scandinavia and whatnot. But, so you always have a few, let's say, extremists. The other thing that happens as soon as that's going, I don't really know where. I'd have to think more about how these things work historically. But the other thing is, as soon as those albums started selling, now we've got market pressure to keep going. Right. So, you get bands, like, I don't know. We're going to talk about Iron Maiden, I think, right? Iron Maiden,
Number of the Beast.
British lads, right? And, they love a good bass riff. They love a good song. But by dipping into some of this imagery and singing about things that are more occult, like even Number of the Beast is not a song about the devil. It's about occult activities and stuff, and then suddenly now it's selling because the kids see it as rebelling against their parents. They are buying into a kind of secondary commercial, maybe slightly popularized version of that cultural resistance, and so some kids, maybe like us, will make our way past Iron Maiden, right, into some of the more, heavier, more extreme parts. But that's, I think that's what
join Lorna Shore in the Hellfire and walk with Randy Bly in hell.
I mean, I loved it. Go back into the 80s. I loved it because my parents hated it. And so, also it was good. I love a good groove, as we talked about last week.
I mean, I wonder though if that's not the thing really to double down on. It's so as we mentioned last time, both of us are raised within the Christian tradition, still identify with that tradition in a lot of ways, and it never made any sense to me that somebody could take Satanism as some actual ontological theory very seriously, when it's of course coming from a tradition in which things don't turn out well for that guy, right? So it always just seemed really strange as a literalist account. But if we take it, I think, in more the way that it shows up in metal music, which is Satan or the devil becomes this kind of image bearer of resistance to authority, to power structures, to oppression, right? It ends up being, I think, a helpful way of saying, we're not going to be like they tell us is the only way to be. And be, like the Ozzy song Hellraiser, what does it mean to be like, those, that guy's a Hellraiser? It means he's resisting these social norms by which his selfhood, his subjectivity has been shaped, has been articulated, and then handed back over to him with a vision of, cultural and economic success that will accord playing by the rules. So I tend to read that kind of resistance narrative. What's the is it, what band has the song Rise, Resist, Revolt, or some arch enemy maybe?
Well, there's Refuse, Resist by the Brazilian band.
Sepultura? Yeah, maybe that's what I'm thinking of. I mean, that encouragement, refuse, resist, rise, revolt, right? And then, well, how are we going to create a community around that kind of, you don't have to be named by them? Well, this is the Arch Enemies track, under black flags we march, right? You end up with this kind of community that emerges not because they're literally participating in satanic rituals or in black masses, but because it's the stuff that scares the bourgeois norms of the authority structure that they've been handed.
Yeah.
Right.
I think they're in that narrative construction, they're retelling their own story by also retelling Satan's story.
Yeah.
Right. So in a lot of this music, Satan does become the victor.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're going to talk about the Behemoth.
Yep.
Right. Satan is the triumphal victor of the Revelation kind of scene, and Satan is real, all these various songs. I think,
which of course is not absent from the Western tradition. I mean, if you think about John Milton's story, like God's kind of dull. Satan's fascinating.
Well, he's clearly the best character in that story.
I mean, so there are moments
headed toward ultimate defeat.
That's true.
So Satan is a tragic character in Milton,
but a compelling one.
He's very compelling.
Right? I mean,
but I think that by retelling the stories, you are now retelling your own story, so that you are not underneath, you're not following.
Right.
But what Satan wanted to do in Milton and in all this tradition is to ascend or to overcome or like to become, high, but also it's about being free.
Yeah.
Right. So if you look at
that's, I think, the thing, right?
Yeah.
Freedom in response to oppression.
Right. And when they get to hell, all the demons are like, yeah, this is great because this place is free. But what you realize is there's a flaw in there.
Right.
And the whole thing just becomes, hell, basically.
Yeah.
So I think, it
does suck when hell becomes hell. Right. I mean, maybe a place to start musically then is with the track from which this episode kind of takes its name, Satan is Real by Kreator. Tell me about this band and what you take this idea of reality to mean, because I think this German band typically associated with a kind of broad thrashy kind of tradition. I tend to read this as basically a challenge to who we take ourselves to be and the idols we've allowed ourselves to become, right? That it's a kind of erasure of our own self-importance, and that there's something coming to kind of undermine that, to overcome that.
So it's using pronouns, right?
Mm-hmm.
Second person and first person pronouns. It begins martyrs.
Yeah.
You cannot kill us all. Yeah. Vengeance will come as a shock. So it's identifying with the people who are the martyrs, the people who have been oppressed or stepped on, the underclass.
Mm-hmm. And
they're saying, well, look, we are rising up. It's a clarion call, right? And then among the wolves, we'll eat the pack. Like we're the ones who have the power, and we're rising up. And you people who are in your comfortable places of authority, you don't realize how much danger you're in.
Right.
But here it comes. And then, it's Satan is real, horror for tyranny, human catastrophe, Satan is real, open your eyes and you'll see Satan is real, basically is the thing that you think has been defeated, the thing that you feel like, you're above and is like, it's in your ordered, comfortable world. We are good. And the evil or the bad over here has been suppressed, has been put down, but it's still there and it's simmering and it's about to come crashing right through your wall.
Yeah. Check yourself before you wreck yourself, but in a German accent. True. So let's listen to Satan is Real by Kreator, and then come back and see how this idea of Satan as a reality might actually have some interesting kind of biblical sources that my Hebrew Bible scholar friend of mine can talk to. So let's listen to Satan is Real by Kreator. I'm not a huge Kreator fan, but I got to admit, I like this track. I have used it often in my philosophy of religion classes to get them to think about, the first day of class, actually, we start by saying, what do you mean when you talk about God? Or what is it that is assumed when we say things like, I'm theist or I'm Christian or I'm Buddhist or whatever the claims are? What is it that's already assumed? And so even if you're an atheist, well, what God are you rejecting? These kinds of ideas. And one of the things that is so fascinating to me is inviting the students not just to think about, well, what assumptions do we have about God or the good, but what assumptions do we have about evil? When I say, oh, Satan's going to get you, right? The great AC/DC, Hell's Bells, one of my favorite tracks in this particular genre. Satan's going to get you. Well, what would that mean? What does that look like? And I think that for many of them, evil ends up being a kind of loss of radical freedom, a subservience, right? A kind of servitude to something that you didn't choose. And then that can look a whole bunch of different ways, in horrifying social ways like enslavement. It can look like, patriarchy as a kind of social norm.
Right. Addiction, we talked about.
Addiction, absolutely. Like, all of these things are models of losing the agency that is so intertwined with our conceptions of willing the good and then living into it. And so I tend to think that when we talk about Satan being real, it's important to also understand, though, there are historical contexts out of which these traditions emerge. And this is, of course, your specialty. So what is kind of this idea of Satan as the embodiment of evil that is grounded in this kind of Hebraic tradition that we all inherit one way or another, whether or not we find ourselves participating in that tradition?
Well, I think that when you talk about religious philosophy, one of the most important topics for Western religion is the shift from monotheism and polytheism, and how all those things get played out. So in the ancient world, if you look back in Mesopotamia, there were plenty of gods that you would say were dangerous or malevolent, maybe, but not evil in the way you think of a Satan, but just they're uncontrollable. They're tricksters, or they're causing problems. And it's a polytheistic context. So if you were suffering, you would think, oh, there's some God that is doing something bad to me.
Yeah.
And so then you would pray to your God, hey, help me out with this situation where this God is, whoever it is causing problems for me.
Which makes sense in the context of a radical view of sovereignty, right? Where the idea is everything that's happening is resulting from some intention, whether it be the good God or the evil God.
Right. In all of this, there's no such thing as chance or random. Everything that happens is caused by some divine power. So if you're sick, or if you're infertile, or somebody dies, or you lose a battle or you win a battle, these things are all being defined by divine will. But in a polytheistic context, we've got competing divine wills all over the place.
Right.
And the Mesopotamian mythology is filled with gods themselves trying to outmaneuver each other in various situations. You do have in Mesopotamia sometimes this idea that, well, maybe my God is punishing me.
Right.
And so there's these texts like the Sherpu texts, which are just long lists of confessions. It's just like dozens and dozens of confessions.
Forgive me.
Some debate about whether you go through and pick it out like a menu, or are you supposed to read all of them like scattershot? At some point you're going to hit the right one.
When I was growing up in church, I don't know if this happened in your Baptist churches, but in my Pentecostal ones, there was a lot of the Lord forgive me for the sins I don't even know I committed.
That's right.
Like the blanket, just in case.
Yes,
right.
That's Sherpu, man. That's 2,500 years old. So, okay. In the Hebrew Bible, what we end up with, debatable exactly where in the history, you end up with monotheism.
Right.
So in that system, God causes everything. So anything good that happens or anything bad that happens. And so when you have the problem of suffering with only one God, now we have theodicy, which is how can bad things happen? And if God is good and if God is powerful, why is there suffering? If God were good enough and there is suffering, must mean that God is not powerful. Or if God is powerful and there's suffering, it must mean that God is not good.
Yeah.
And so we end up explaining suffering as anything but. It's punishment. It's testing. It's some kind of process that's mysterious, known only to God. And that's the background for the book of Job, where the friends are all trying to explain away his suffering. Yeah. And he's like, actually, no, none of this makes any sense. Well, the monotheistic...
Which philosophers would call radical evil. It's evil that has no justificatory structure, right? It's not one we could explain.
Right.
And I find the book of Job to be one of those interesting texts. Is it a text about radical evil, or is it a text about radical trust? I trust God even when there's no explanation, there is no justification. Nonetheless, God's got me. It's all okay, right? And I'm never sure, we don't want to get too much in the weeds, but philosophically, that text is this beautiful moment of interrogating the ease with which we would say evil falls outside of our accounts, or evil is what invites deep relational trust in the face of what can't be explained.
There are a lot of potentialities in that text, for sure. In the Hebrew tradition, I would incline to say that it's chaos. And so the chaos is not personified.
Yeah.
It's not evil. There's a scholar who wrote a book 25, 30 years ago. John Levinson wrote a book called Creation and the Persistence of Evil, in which he argues that the force that is challenging creation is chaos.
Right.
And it's not personified. This is a demythologizing of those Mesopotamian myths in which you have these evil characters. And the idea is, no, we work on maintaining the boundaries of creation to keep the chaos at bay. So you've got the Behemoth and Leviathan and Job, and the Leviathan is God's pet. He has him on a leash, and it's like, yeah, the world is chaotic. It's a little dangerous, and that's the way I like it.
Right.
So, but the question whether there's evil in Job, I think, is interesting. But what happens is the Israelites basically end up explaining, let's say, the Babylonian exile. Explaining it by saying we sinned against God and therefore this bad thing happened to us. The temple was destroyed and everybody had to go, be spread out all over the world. That's the diaspora. By the time you get to the Greek period, we're talking like, let's say 2nd century BC, the Jews in Jerusalem are being really heavily oppressed by the Hellenists, by the Greeks.
Right.
And that ends up kicking off the Maccabean revolt. Right. And if you go into Maccabees, the thing that they're doing is basically outlawing Jewish religion, forcing people to not circumcise their children, forcing people to eat foods they're not supposed to eat, worship other gods. I mean, it's a catastrophe.
Yeah.
Well, in that context, how do you explain that as the work of God?
Right.
Like, this is not God punishing us. We're good.
Right.
So now what we have is I think of it as like a release valve to suffering or to injustice. Now, no, we have a more dualistic understanding that there is this power of evil in the world. And now we have God, Satan, eventually, not in Daniel, but God, Satan, maybe a little bit, angels, devils, heaven, hell, and there's a war that's taking place. And the people who are the good people of God on earth are fighting against the bad people who are actually instruments of evil on earth. And when God defeats evil in time to come, then that will be also our victory over the evil ones. And those who are faithful and true to God now will be the ones who will dwell with God in the new creation when it emerges. So the world is destroyed. The world is going down the toilet. God is going to have a new creation, and those of us who are faithful will live in it. So the whole idea, I would argue, in the biblical tradition of Satan or of evil is a response to unjust suffering. And it's an attempt to say, this is an explanation for why this is happening. And obviously, this is not pure dualism because Satan is never at the same level as God.
Right.
But God, for whatever reason, has his own purposes to let this go for a while. But what we're waiting for is deliverance. What we're waiting for is deliverance. But it's about injustice. And I think the thing that switches in the stuff we're talking about is, this relates to last time's discussion. Who are the instruments of injustice now?
Right. Right.
So that's a quick. I
think it's fantastic. Yeah, no, and
lecture.
Again, if you're watching on YouTube, drop comments in, ask us questions. We'll do our best to answer them. If you've got suggestions for tracks we need to consider, we'd love to hear it. What you're describing, though, this battle royale of heaven and hell, which, of course, now having grown up in the kind of contemporary Christian culture, I'm thinking, the Carmen song. About the champion and the great warrior and the boxing match that exists between God and Satan, right? But a metal song that I think does that same dynamic, but walks away from personified beings engaging in some sort of actual metaphysical struggle, and brings it up to what I would describe as a more contemporary discussion about how injustice plays out. And all of us are, might say, quoting Luther, right? Simul justus et peccator. We are all simultaneously tempted into sin, tempted to evil, whether or not we believe there's sin. We could also be jackasses, right? We can be people we wish we weren't. And we can also be drawn toward or find the courage to be the people we wish we were.
Right.
And that, I think, is nowhere as well presented as in the Black Sabbath track with Ronnie James Dio as lead singer during this period, Heaven and Hell.
It's one of my favorite songs of all time.
It's just staggeringly good. Some of the lyrics in this: sing me a song, you're a singer. Do me a wrong, you're a bringer of evil. The devil is never a maker. The less you give, you're a taker. So it's on. It's heaven and hell. The idea, I once heard an interview with Dio about this, and he said the whole point is that heaven and hell are these constant temptations or constant options. And so this is why when it says, it's on and on and on, it's this war doesn't get resolved. It's not about ultimately landing in heaven or ultimately ending up in hell. There's never a moment in existence that isn't faced by, we could screw this up really badly.
Right.
And there's also never a moment where there's not an opportunity to be the best beings we could be. Like, both of these are always in play as an animating existential tension.
Well, it's a carousel, right? So
That's right.
Life is a carousel, not a journey up a mountain or something like that. My favorite line in this has always been where he says, "Love can be seen as the answer, but nobody bleeds for the dancer."
Oof.
And it's a little stilted because of the rhyme he's trying to do. But he's saying, look, we all give lip service to love, to beauty, to goodness.
Yeah.
But when it's time to bleed, will you bleed for art?
Yeah.
Will you bleed for beauty? Will you bleed for love?
Oof.
And then at the end of the song, he says, as heaven and hell, you've got to bleed for the dancer.
Yeah.
And then he says, look for the answer. Like, there is a way forward. There we have a choice. We can make good choices. But like you said, it's round and around and around. It's not I'd made that choice now and now I'm good for here on out.
Yeah, I mean, and that idea is also in one of the last verses. It has this great line where it says, it's heaven and hell, oh well, and they'll tell you black is really white. The moon is just the sun at night. And when you walk in golden halls, you get to keep the gold that falls. Now,
it's trickle down.
Yeah, I mean, this is straight critique of corporate capitalistic models of human greatness. This is, I mean, to make it a little bit over spiritual, this is the abomination of desolation, where you take a theological commitment to kenosis, or a God humbled as servant, and you present it in, I don't know, the golden halls of Mar-a-Lago, and act like you are somehow manifesting the good of these traditions. Ronnie James Dio becomes the prophetic voice saying, man, like, we've inverted everything that we thought we were claiming. And that's the great delusion. And so then he ends, it's heaven and hell, fool, fool, right? The fools here are the ones who think they've got this figured out, because they're the ones standing in the name of the good in the hollowed halls or the marble walls. And yet when it comes to NEH cuts or National Endowment of the, humanities or the arts, gut that stuff because it's indoctrinating our kids to become critical thinkers. Well, no crap. Of course, that's what it will be presented as, because if Satan is the freedom from the oppression and the devil represents the liberty to think clearly about the good, well, we can't have that. They might major in philosophy or, my goodness, religious studies or art or ceramics. We need them to be good business leaders. Right. Like, Dio gets this, and in such a sexy way that it almost, I think, gets lost on the people listening to it. But I think we should. Let's check out Heaven and Hell by Black Sabbath. And if you are anything like us, this is one where you will wish we could just play it 3 or 4 times.
It's long.
It is a long track.
It's a long song, but
it's so good. It's so good. All right, we'll be back in a minute. So here's a question for you, Dr. Bibb. And I know this is fighting words. I mean, it's not quite as controversial as Georgia versus Florida State say. Are you an Ozzy or Dio fan?
Dio.
Me all the way down.
Dio,
I'm right there with you.
Because when I first encountered these, we're thinking like 7th grade, right? At that point, the Dio albums had come out. The Dio Black Sabbath album had come out, Heaven and Hell. Then they put out a live album, right? And then when he came out with his solo release, he became my favorite artist. So Dio is always
it's also
been my
great because you've got
artist.
dragons and rainbow mountains and stuff. Like it's it would probably now, of course, like all be thrown out as, you know, some big like Pride album or something if the DEI police came in from Washington. But the idea that is so cool about it is it combines, I think, appropriately the fantasy of the imagery. And this is different, I think, than Ozzy, who I mean, it's still hard to critique. Like his voice is epic. There's no one that sounds like him. But the early Black Sabbath, I think, didn't have the grandiose dimension that Dio brought. But what they did have, and this is maybe a way of asking about this side of metal, like if you listen to a track like Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath, right? Also a very long song. It almost has a performative dimension. It's like a black mass set to music almost, right?
With the tritone.
Yeah, the Devil's Note is right there, and it's compelling in all sorts of ways. But it also, I think, has this kind of interesting revelation or interesting traction that's anchored in the working class reality of Ozzy's, you know, childhood, right? Like it's not fighting dragons with swords and battle axes and stuff. It's, you know, in the slums of Britain and the Black Sabbath being surrounded by these churches that are wealthy and rich, and yet the people live in squalor. Like I think the early stuff has that dimension.
Right. It's the Witches of Black Masses from the song we played last time.
Yes, that's exactly right. What do you think about this? We might call it economic or social register at which these issues show up. Like in Heaven and Hell, it's, I think, existential. But what about this kind of economic dynamic that shows up, I think, a lot in evil imagery, commenting about the lives lived by people that are forgotten, right? And trying to find some community in that space.
Well, I think Dio in particular had for lack of a better word, a heart for some of those folks.
I agree.
Like the song Invisible, right? And there's a trans character in that song. And, you know, a lot of his characters are lost people, especially youth, lost youth, wandering, confused, abandoned, you know, and like, where do they find their health, or how can they find healing? It's in each other. Yeah. Right. So it's we are here, community. You know, we are together. And so you know, your parents have thrown you out. Your community has rejected you because of your sexuality or whatever. Right. But here we are. You can be part of us, and we are the ones. Hang out. Right. And again, it's very appropriate then, I think, to bring in some imagery that represents the polar opposite of what it's rejecting, which is like, well, okay, if Satan is inappropriate freedom and desire and self or ego, you know, if Satan is, you know, push back against authority, to push back against tradition, then let's have some of that. We need some of that. Let's go hard. Well, and maybe this is a good place then to talk about this idea of inversion, right? Because a track that you wanted to talk about is by Behemoth. Now, I admit Behemoth is a band that when I say I struggle with them, it's tricky because I find them to be an adequate blackened death metal band. Like, I mean, I don't not like their music, but I do find them to be shticky, if that's a word, in a way that some of the bands don't hit me that way. But it might be, and I think this is maybe something that you pick up on in ways I don't. They're doing something, Nurgle especially, like he's really smart. He's not, it's not just a shtick to sell more albums or to be more popular or whatever. Though given how extreme their music is, they've succeeded at that, right? I mean, he's become kind of a cultural figure in ways that not many in this extreme genre have attained. But he understands what he's doing at the level of inversion. And in this track, Ora Pro Nubius Lucifer, what is it you find happening here relative to this inversion of actually a prayer to the saints? So, Nurgle, I mean, he's committed to the bit. He's all in. That's right. He's committed to the bit. And and it raises the question of, is it a bit?
Yeah.
And Ozzy in the 70s accused me of Satanist, and I think everybody who knew anything at all about Ozzy just thought that was hilarious. Right. So this is an open,
right? Yeah.
When I saw them in concert, they were doing incantations over the audience.
Wow.
As like at the beginning of the show, in the same way, if you went to like a big mega church kind of thing, and the music's starting up, and then somebody's up front praying for the audience and invoking God.
When I was a drummer for some Christian ministry groups, we used to go to different churches, but before we would play, we would all walk up and down the aisles and pray for the people that would be there, that God would, be present. Again, I think Nurgle, I mean, if it's genuine, I almost find it more compelling, if that makes sense, because it's so intentionally flipped. I disagree with him about where he lands. I struggle. Like, I've never seen him in concert. And to be honest, part of why is I think too much of my upbringing still makes me feel a little creeped out about it.
Sure. I was a little creeped out. I gotta admit.
It gives me pause, right? Like, I'm not looking to go to a Behemoth concert, and yet the bands that play with Behemoth, I would go see like all day long, right?
Man, they slayed.
Yeah,
it was good. It was really good. So Ora pro nobis Lucifer is a prayer. Ora pro nobis in Latin means pray for us.
Yeah,
and this is a phrase that's used in a lot of Catholic prayers. Pray for us, Mary. Pray for us, Michael. And you're asking the saints to intervene for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Ora pro nobis Lucifer, even in the name, by putting Lucifer at the end of that,
mm-hmm.
that's a moment of like, wait, what? This is record scratch, right? It's the inversion,
interruptive.
And when you look at the lyrics, what he's describing is the war, this divine battle between good and evil I mentioned a minute ago.
Mm-hmm.
And in this version of it, Satan is winning that battle.
Yeah.
So if you read the book of Revelation, there are multiple waves of this battle where Satan is leading armies out of hell, and they're fighting against the saints and everything else. But then Satan ends up being chained up for a while, and then he gets out, and then he gets in the end thrown into the pit, and that's the end of the story. It's a story about the triumph of good over evil. But if you look at Ora pro nobis, he calls Satan Angelus Satani, right? It's he's an angel. You alone have suffered. He says, I'll smite heaven's golden pride. Right. Oof. Well, that's almost like a direct quote from Milton.
Yeah.
Right. So you're evoking very specifically this image, this cultural mythology of Satan that comes through the Milton stream. Satan of Elohim, none dare stand in your way. Thou bow to none of Eden's feculence.
Wow.
That would be humans. Would Eden's feculence be humans?
Maybe? And actually explain Elohim, like what that's doing in the Hebraic tradition to be deployed here.
Well, Elohim is the word that's used for God in the Bible. It's also technically plural. So Satan of Elohim could be Satan who is made by God, mm-hmm. or Satan associated with God, or it could be Satan among the gods.
Right. Which goes back to that idea of this plurality dynamic, which I definitely think for those who see this stuff as real, right? And I should make clear, at some level, I think the vast majority of people in the Christian tradition would hold some conception of Satan being real.
Right.
What we're talking about real here is the idea of then inverting that, not as the guy who tempts us and gets beaten down and yay, God triumphs, but changing that story, right? Making the main character the one who everybody else ignored and marginalized. And that's where your point about Dio and metal music, like it's the it's the music of the downtrodden at some level. And so the idea that, hey, we'll side with the one who's kicked out of, rather than being okay with all of those who do the kicking out, right? If you bracket the technical story and just take that idea, notice, like, my own Christian commitments would lead me to say things like, I stand with the marginal, the oppressed, the excluded, the downtrodden, right? And yet that's in some ways what Satan is being used to then be the god of, right?
Well, Lucifer literally in this song is saving the world.
Yeah.
So it says, Savior, world's decay, conquered in temptation, and in the fall of Eve. And then you get to the bridge.
Yeah.
It's bridge / chorus. I don't know.
Amazing. Yeah.
For thine is the kingdom and the power. For thine is the kingdom and the glory forever.
Yeah.
That's the reference
Amen and
to
amen.
to the end of the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
That little part. It's not in the oldest manuscripts, by the way. So
Interesting.
sometimes if
I
you
didn't
pick
know
up a Bible, it won't be in there. And then
Huh.
you're reading along and like you sort of say it anyway, right?
It just happens. Yeah.
That's how liturgy works. But
Wow.
this is Lucifer through the fall of Eve, through this whole war, essentially saving the world from God, like creating a different kind of reality that is opposed to,
And there's a variety of ways we could make sense of that, right? So Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century German philosopher who's famous for claiming God is dead, which we can talk about if we want later on, but he tries to call humanity back to an alternative tradition. He says, we got sucked into the god of Apollo, but what if we turn to the god of Dionysus, right? Like what if we changed which of those pantheon of the gods we thought was the coolest one, which was the one we were leaning toward? We see a very different vision of what then becomes possible. And part of what I think is so fascinating today, in a time when I struggle even to know what it means. We talked about this last time. Like for me to say, well, I still identify as part of the Christian tradition. To many people, that means literally the opposite thing of what it means to me, right? It doesn't mean that I am a conservative. It doesn't mean that I am then claiming we've got to stand against the rights of the downtrodden. We've got to get rid of these, concerns for inclusion. It means all the opposite. It means that other-oriented love becomes inscribed into the very fabric of the real, such that neighbor love becomes radical self-denial in the context of a society that tells you the more money you've got, the more dignity you have, right? So in that sense, like, oh, well, shoot, if that's what you mean by God, I'm with the devil, right? So it does have this kind of inverted move. I mean, Behemoth, I think, take it maybe 3 steps further than my account would allow. But that idea I find really compelling. It's like, oh, well, if that's your God, I'm with the other guy, right?
Well, if the thing that Lucifer is most closely associated with in Milton is the desire for freedom, right?
Yeah.
To not be under the thumb of God,
Right.
better, free in hell than a slave in heaven,
That's
right?
right.
What we're talking about here really is, are we free to reject tradition? Right. So you grew up in a pretty conservative, culturally conservative church,
yeah,
Pentecostal. So did I. And we were told this is the truth. This is how things are. And as you go into your education, inevitably, if you do it right, you're going to encounter things that are challenging your tradition. At that point, you got a decision to make.
Right.
Are you going to just ignore and double down?
Yep.
Or are you going to be open to it? And where does that lead? And having some kind of predetermined boundary is not really possible.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what you're going to find when you go through the wall, right? Through the looking glass.
Yeah.
And
questions go down, right? Like all the way.
If we now just in that moment of inflection admit that we are free to choose, I can either submit to this vision of God or this doctrine that I was taught, or I can, in my freedom, go somewhere else. Where am I going? And I think to say, oh, where I'm going is straight to Lucifer is a little extreme, but what is it doing? It's highlighting that. It's really, that choice is now in relief in the greatest possible way. Right. And so if we are we free or not? Or are we bound? Are we slaves to tradition? And if we're free, where do we go?
I think it's fantastic. Well, that's a wonderful setup to Ora Pro Nobis Lucifer by Behemoth. So let's check this track out. And as Chris Rock says at the end of the Marilyn Manson. That's what it was. Yeah, the Marilyn Manson concert or the show that they did. I think it was maybe for the Grammys or MTV Awards or something. And then he, comes out and says, "Get your butt to church." So I think this is a track that might motivate that kind of response. But let's check this out. Ora Pro Nobis Lucifer by Behemoth. So one of the things that I find so cool about what it is that this inversion model, and I think you landed the plane so well, where you say, is freedom real? And if freedom is real, I think one of the things that it requires us to confront is the bad choices that lead to so much evil in the world, right? We're not talking now necessarily about hurricanes and tornadoes and mosquitoes and leeches and stuff, right? But we are bad to each other. We could fundamentally envision a different world and then work together to bring it about, but we don't. We police people's bodies because we've labeled them as the threat to protect the status quo of a particular power structure as now obviously instantiating the good. And then almost inevitably, we throw a bunch of God talk behind it in order to make the people who might say, whoa, but we could do it differently. Now they're threatened with being anathema, right? Or castigated from within the church. Those are high stakes indeed.
Right.
And one of the things that I find so cool about metal music is this invitation to embrace what is possible if we recognize these human failures, these human frailties. And a track that I want to throw in here, and I know it's definitely out of the kind of mainstream of our metal purists that we've been talking about, I actually want to think about the track People Equal SH blank T, which again, we said we weren't going to cuss on this podcast, but maybe it's quoting. I don't know. Does that count as just citation in this case?
I think it's okay. My pastor called it secondhand cussing.
Okay. We'll say, yeah, we'll quote here. So the Slipknot track, People Equal Shit. I love this track, just because it turns out I'm kind of a Slipknot fan a little bit because I grew up in the broadly new metal, groove metal kind of spaces.
This is the metal I know the least about.
And see, what I like about this is we talked earlier about creating these communities, these we's that emerge in response to the oppression that they've been handed, right? They're not okay with how they find themselves in the world, who they've been told they are. You're useless. You're a problem. You're a decay. And so what Slipknot does is the fan base refer to themselves as the maggots. And the idea is that they eat on the decaying flesh, right? They feed on the thing that has been, in fact, dying for a long time. And so it's so cool because part of what they do in this track is try to invite us to recognize we are the people that are screwed up. So it says at one point, right, it never stops. You can't be everything to everyone. Contagion. I'm sitting at the side of Satan. What do you want from me? They never told me the failure I was meant to be. Overdo it. Don't tell me you blew it. Stop your whining. Fight your way through it. I'm not like you. I just screw it up. Come on, everybody. We all have to die. People equal shit. That, like, part of what they're doing is saying, what if I just embrace what you've told me I am? And then we got together to change what it is that we take to be the ideal for who we're becoming, right? It's again an inversion, and I love that. Then the chorus, which is not exactly sophisticated, it's a algorithm, right? And so at some level, P equals S, like this. You might say, in an age of AI, like the algorithmic presentation they're presenting is also, though I think the track's a little bit early for this reading, but I think it can bear it. It's also a critique of, in an age where algorithms are now making decisions that humans used to make, we've further eviscerated and evacuated our agency. And we are nothing but the excrement of the algorithm that is now the new God we worship. Right. And this is certainly happening right now when thousands and thousands and thousands of government workers are being let go because they're nothing but in the way. And the algorithms are just running through, destroying people's lives on the basis of this vision of supremacy, this vision of power from those who are the ones telling people to stop whining, get a job, cut your hair, get rid of the tattoos. And so as a response, they're saying, hey, so the algorithm you've thrown to us, we're going to throw right back to you, but stand on the opposite side.
So Slipknot, yeah, this is a little later than this, but if you think about this idea in the 80s, how many movies in the 80s reflect that exact idea?
Yeah.
Where it's a group of outcasts, misfits, ground under the heel of something that's happened, and are trying to band together. I think about Road Warrior.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think about Escape from New York.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course, you can even add the Goonies of a certain stripe.
Sure. I mean,
Freaks and Geeks of a certain level is doing this, right? There's a lot of that. Yeah.
I mean, so this idea that there's this underclass, right? The Morlocks.
Yep.
Right. You know, there's this underclass. And if they ever, or if in this case, we ever find a way to join together, we're unstoppable.
Yeah.
And we represent Satan to those people. So, yeah. Okay. Here Satan comes.
Yeah. Hey, you reaped the whirlwind. Well, here comes the thing that you created. And in some ways, though I have no idea if Slipknot was doing this or not, it's important to understand, like, that's ultimately what defenders of like a Marxist theory are saying. They may or may not be claiming down with private property. What they're saying is you've created a majority of human existence that is now so disconnected from its own humanity that there is no option that you've given them except revolt, right? You made that necessary.
Right.
This is what Giorgio Agamben calls bare life. He says, when you've stripped away everything from people and then you've told them that their very existence is an obstacle to human flourishing, don't be surprised if the only agency that they have is the agency to say, we will storm whatever barricade you put in front of us.
And especially when one of the means to do that is reification, where the system that you built is basically defined as God. So it's the religion, it's the capitalism, or it's the political structure, right? We built this system and now have put it up there basically as the God, and we act like we are all serving the system and there's nothing we can do to change it. But really, it was a thing that we made.
Yeah.
And, so
this is Feuerbach, right? I mean, we worship gods that look just like the us we wish we were. And so we tend to worship gods that look an awful lot like powerful guys within our society. And then when you start realizing, well, wait a minute, maybe God is dead. Maybe those powerful people don't have to be in charge. Maybe we could think differently. And you start saying, oh, so people are just garbage? Watch what garbage can do, right? So in some sense, this track is not "we're so awful." It's a track, I think, about empowering those who have been thrown away, right? So let's listen to People Equal Shit by Slipknot. And then I want to come back and talk about a Lamb of God track that I think responds to this in a slightly different way.
I'm going to check one thing before you get going.
Those of you on YouTube, we're taking a quick break while we check some audio specifics, but we would love to hear from you. So I can see on this end that there are quite a few of you actually watching the live stream. So we would love to hear comments, questions, thoughts you've got. Just drop them in the chat there on YouTube and they will pop up so that we can see them. I do hope that you all are enjoying the conversation. We figure that you can listen to music pretty much anywhere. And so we're trying to do some music. But an awful lot more of conversation about that music.
My mic was down real low.
Now those bumps are looking a lot better.
Yeah, so we'll see. I mean, I can fix that for the podcast. Push it,
right?
But for anybody listening to the unedited live stream, that's going to be a challenge.
Hopefully.
Apologies.
Hopefully
look, we're
okay.
Amateurs, A. B, it's the second time we've done it. We'll figure it out.
I got no apologies other than I can't do anything about the not being as pretty as Bryan Bibb. So, I should
have stopped earlier, but it'll be fine. It'll be all right.
Yeah, we can adjust it for later. So People Equal Shit by Slipknot, that track, man, like that for me, it's not the gold standard, but I definitely turn to this one when I'm having a really, really rough day. When I get angry in traffic, the song might come on fairly quickly. But I want to look at a Lamb of God track Now, Lamb of God is absolutely one of my favorite bands. Super honored. Randy Blythe, lead singer, is actually writing a foreword for a new book I've got coming out. And so once that book drops, of course, I'll be sure to share everybody and would love to get you to check it out. But the track is Walk With Me in Hell. Now, you just said part of what's so compelling about these musical moves is that it connects us to a community of the downtrodden and it creates solidarity, right? One of the ways in which anarchist movements are named is they support liberty, equality, and solidarity. And we tend to think that that solidarity, tripod, that's the one that we abandon pretty quickly in our kind of liberal democratic capitalist structures. But Lamb of God does such an interesting thing. Again, they're coming from working class Richmond, Virginia, but they've got in their track the following. So it says, pray for blood, pray for the cleansing, pray for the flood, pray for the end of this nightmare. This lie of a life can as quickly as it came dissolve. So notice it's almost reads to me like something out of the book of Lamentations, right? We seek only reprieve and welcome the darkness, the myth of a meaning so lost and forgotten. In other words, we find ourselves so abandoned, so abused, so forgotten, so ignored, that reprieve and darkness become solutions to this, right? We talked about like suicide solution last time with Ozzy. There is this kind of, when you're so lost in a particular kind of addicted world, getting out of that might mean, hey, if it means the end of my very selfhood, at least it would end this kind of suffering. And then they say, and this is, I think, again, a kind of gospel, we might say, a good news to the broken. Take hold of my hand, for you are no longer alone.
That could be a line in a praise song.
Right? Walk with me in hell. That probably wouldn't make it to the Hillsong's lyrics. But
you could say through hell.
Through it, walk with me in hell. And then look, pray for solace, pray for resolve, pray for a savior, pray for deliverance, some kind of purpose, a glimpse of a light in this void of existence. God. And then it's so slick. Witness the end of an age. Hope dies in hands of believers who seek the truth in a liar's eye. Again, that Ronnie James Dio move here, right? It's those who are, falling all over themselves to get to church and tell you how to live your life are often those who are the very ones labeling as their model of God and their model of goodness somebody who has made a career, made a life, made a fortune out of lying. And that's where those of us who see through that and are like, you've got to be kidding. Randy steps up and says, take hold of my hand. You're no longer alone. We are in this together. Walk with me in hell. Because, of course, hell now is not some place after death, some place where, Lucifer sits. Hell is the world in which we exist, having been abandoned by those moments of human solidarity that make possible flourishing. Walk with me in hell is, I genuinely believe, Randy saying, hey, I'll walk with you in the midst of this. But again, for me, I read that as what I understand like the core Christian message to be. Now, I don't think Randy's doing that, right? But
he knows it, right? He knows
this.
it. He's using it.
It's so smart. So smart. Yeah. What do you think about Lamb of God?
Well, I don't know that much about them. I was in this point still listening to the good old stuff.
I
think once I got through grad school, I started listening to some newer things, so like I love, Gojira and things like that.
Yep.
But there was a new metal era that I just kind of missed.
Yeah.
And, I can see the value in it, and I'm sure it's good. I actually saw Lamb of God as well on that same show where Behemoth was playing.
Oh, wow.
And it was a great show. I like their stuff, but I'm not as up on them as some of the, the OG stuff.
And I'm definitely more Lamb of God and moving forward. This new wave of American heavy metal stuff is definitely where I really find, I think, my stride. And again, I think a lot of it's because I'm a drummer. And I just find the drums and the rhythms so compelling. And this is also post thrash in a certain way, so that we have moments of it, but it definitely is more, groove metal inspired than thrash metal inspired. And then you've also got, the guttural vocals, which I find super, super compelling. And so, yeah, Lamb of God's, I think, one of the best in the game. Let's check out Walk With Me in Hell. Yeah, man, that's good stuff. I'm with you on Dio, but I will take Lamb of God over Exodus any day.
I can see that. It's fine. It's fine.
So I want to move now to something that I find intriguing, and I don't have a good take on it. So are you familiar with the band, a very recent band, Lorna Shore? They have this track, To the Hellfire.
I don't know that one.
This one, man, oh goodness, it is. Again, I'm not a huge Lorna Shore fan, but it is one of these tracks that I think is just doing something that changes where we are and where we can go.
So contextualize this band for me.
So think. Oh shoot. Extreme metal in the sort of space of oh crap, I'm blanking on the we'll edit this out. I'm blanking on the subgenre. It's not deathcore. Oh, good grief. Well, I guess they are deathcore. It says deathcore. I don't think they're deathcore really, but think so we'll start. You'll cut this in a second. Everybody on YouTube, so you get all the warts and all. So Lorna Shore, I guess you could identify them as a kind of deathcore band. Lots of blast beats, lots of not just guttural, but extreme guttural, to the point where, like pig squeals and growls and snorts, and like it's different stuff.
So without this Google lyrics page, you've got no idea.
Not a clue. Yeah. But what's so interesting in this track, To the Hellfire, is I think they do something that is maybe, I don't know if postmodern is the right category, but they're beginning, I think, to move into something that is more about like modern isolation, mental health crises, struggling with your identity, wrestling with how to find, any traction in the world. Like it's the kind of, like, I think there's reasons why this stuff gets very popular with our students, even if they don't really understand the lyrics either. But, I'll hold on to feeling until my final breath escapes, gazing upon this world until it fades. Fall with me into the other night. We can go beyond the horizon again. Fall with me until we're out of time. Let the current swallow. These whispers keep clawing. Your mind is dissolving. Light sink while you bathe in hallucination. Accept this descent into the night, releasing your grasp to induce separation. Plunged into the shadows, lost in sensation. We're free, falling down into the ever black. Can you feel it? These pins and needles. I mean, then go down, though, and you'll see him say things like, Azrael, guiding me beyond the veil. Obitual, free me from this mortal shell. Right? Swallowed by the womb of death, enter the void. Like, this is dark stuff. But it's also, I think, more reflective of a kind of... It's the next generation of struggle from that kind of working class sensibility of Lamb of God, right? It's not just talking about, hey, we can get through this together. It's more like my pain is the thing that somehow gives me meaning. They've got a series of tracks called The Pain Remains. And like, what do we do in a space where maybe all that's left is the pain itself? Like that great line in Hurt, like, I cut myself today, like, just to know if I was real. Like these kinds of dynamics are, I think, more what people like Lorna Shore are doing. And they're using hellfire as a way of getting us into that space.
It feels, again, I'm responding sort of on the fly here. it feels like surrender.
Yeah.
And surrender always raises the question of what are you surrendering to?
Right.
But is it a surrender to despair? Is it hopelessness?
Yeah.
I mean, at the end, you're passing through the gate, the effing gate, descending towards the end faster.
Yeah.
The womb of death. I mean, it's like death is sweet release.
Yep.
I mean, look, we can all, I think, in our moments identify with the idea of death as sweet release, but
I mean, but what about if it's like almost like the kind of stuff that would be maybe the metal analogy, the analog to like the SoundCloud rappers talking about, getting drunk, taking Molly, like the idea being, hey, screw it, none of it matters anyway. Like almost a accelerationist despair, and all that's left is just the moment of abandon. Like,
well, yeah. So go read Job.
Yeah.
Right now, I mean, read Job chapters 9 and 10, especially. This is the ones always assigned for students. Job is like given into despair. I mean, he's like, God is a tyrant. God is hurting people for no reason.
Yeah.
I believe that if I got up in the morning and got dressed and washed myself and thought, you know what, I'm just going to soldier on. As soon as I walked out the door, God would pick me up and throw me in the gutter.
Yeah.
Like that's in the Bible.
Yeah.
Right. And,
yeah.
So where I land with that is in the end, God is like, Job, good job with what you said.
Right.
So where I land with that is there's something in the expression, right? It's one thing to actually give in to the womb of death.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing to write a song about it,
right,
and sing it to thousands of people, in which we all together sing about giving into the womb of death.
Yeah.
And that there is something cathartic.
Again, it's that solidarity in our own despair.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, where does it go? I think is an interesting question. But
and that's the thing I do wrestle with a lot. Like we talked about earlier, theodicies. I am philosophically, this is sort of my technical moment. I am part of a sort of movement often known as the anti-theodicy philosophers, right? And so I tend to think the very act of trying to give some sort of rational justification for the goodness of God in light of the reality of suffering in the world, right? Or defending how God's power and goodness are compatible in light of what surely seem to be reasons to think that's not the case. Those theodicies, those accounts of how this could all make sense, I actually think in the face of actual evil, in the face of suffering, those attempts actively increase the amount of suffering in the world.
Well, that's Job. The friends layer on.
They make it worse.
They do.
And I think all you can do, not in the context of a philosophical classroom, right? So there, we can do these thought experiments to say, is it logically possible? Is there a way to respond if blah, blah, blah? But philosophers that do that stuff, I think, are often careful then to say, please, Alvin Plantinga famously in his free will defense says, like, do not go offer the free will defense to somebody in the midst of moral turmoil. Like, that's going to make it worse. And so I think one of the things that is often missed by those of us who spend our lives thinking, at least very carefully about some very difficult things, it may be that all we can do is stop talking and say, hey, but I'm here with you. Right.
Yes.
And I think maybe that's where Lorna Shore, bands even like Deaf Heaven, I think have this kind of vibe to some of what they're doing. They're a little bit older. It's this sense of solidarity in that this sucks, and they're naming it and calling it the case. And then not so much walk with me in hell like we get in the Lamb of God, but just acknowledging that this is hell. Right. Maybe that's all we can do in some cases. And yet that's not nothing. And I think that maybe is where these bands speak.
That's good. I like it. I mean, I think, that coheres with everything that I do with Job. When I talk to students about it, I'm like, okay, look, here are some theoretical ways to talk about this. But I believe that the book is deconstructing every one of those all the way through. And what's interesting to me is in Job, you have 2 chapters of narrative and then a half chapter of narrative at the end, and then 40 chapters of poetry.
Yeah.
If you go out and you start interviewing people and you say, what's the book of Job about? they're going to give you an answer that's actually the diametrical opposite of what the book is. They'll say Job was a righteous man, tested by God, remained faithful to God, and then was rewarded for his faithfulness. And the point of the book is, if you actually read the poetry, there is no account. There is no explanation.
Yeah.
Right? That God doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Whether to think about God as the one who punishes or God as one who rewards.
Yeah.
And in that case, how do you explain the end where he quote unquote gets all his stuff back? Right. Well, you have new kids. Does that replace your old kids?
Right.
But one reading is, one reading is that it's ironic.
Yeah.
The ending is ironic, where the reader knows and Job knows something that other people in the scene don't know.
Yeah.
But I also see it as capitulation. I see it as editors bringing this book into the tradition and defanging it just a little bit.
Yeah.
And
we can live with it a little bit easier now.
Yeah. So there is and the same thing happens at the end of Ecclesiastes. There is a temptation to take a kind of a radical position.
Yeah.
And sort of put it there, but then you package it in orthodoxy so that it's protected a little bit and it doesn't quite all dissolve in the system, if you get my meaning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And something like this and some of the more extreme stuff we're talking about at least has it's raw.
Yeah.
It's not there's not a final verse where it's like, it's going to be okay.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
There's not
it's
that
all gonna
final
work out.
word. It's not trying to lift you up at all.
Yeah.
So the purity of it is actually, is it brave? I don't know, but it's bracing. I think very effective because of that.
That's a good word. Well, let's listen to the Hellfire by Lorna Shore, a track that has propelled this band, I think, to one of the elites within our contemporary metal world. So To the Hellfire by Lorna Shore. It's interesting. One of the things that we talk about when we think about Job is how then to make sense of that redemptive moment at the end. And there's actually a song. I don't know if you're familiar with this track or not, but it's by a band called Tourniquet, a thrash metal Christian band from back in the 80s. They have a song called Theodicy on Trial. And it's both a really good thrash metal song. So I'm actually a fan of Tourniquet, though I don't really love thrash metal. But it's basically the story of Job. They say, Satan called upon the Lord. I must perform a test to prove that faith in God is contingent on being blessed. One of the richest men of the second millennium, Job was stripped of all his wealth, 3 daughters and 7 sons. He tore his robe and shaved his head, fell to the ground, worshiped God, and said,
It's a little on the nose.
It's a little on the nose. I was naked when I came here. The Lord gave it. He can take it away. Right. And so it goes through and just tells this story. But then look at the end of this. Because I do like this song. I like what Tourniquet's doing. I think they actually are one of the best straight up. Like if you want a thrash speed kind of band, I think you actually can hang with any of those bands, regardless of being Christian. But look at the end. Rewarded for his faithfulness, Job was give back his wealth, twice the riches as before. Then God gave his discourse. Where were you when I laid the foundations, dug the ocean, set its limits? Were you around when I plotted constellations? Answer me. And then here's the last line. He who puts the Lord on trial puts himself on the stand. Now, we could read this as a kind of, I think, compelling interrogation of human arrogance. So I'm a fan of the book Reverence by Paul Woodruff, a philosopher who talks about reverence being one of the great forgotten virtues. And he says all reverence ultimately is the realization that you aren't God, right? And he says we need this deeply in today's society. It's not a religious virtue, he says. It's a community virtue. If you're God, then the community needs to shut up and listen. If you aren't God, you probably need to find a way to work with each other in community, right? So it's this really powerful virtue model. So that could be what's happening. My hunch is that's not what's happening in the context of a Christian band kind of responding to, the evil they perceive in the world. I think they do see it as a kind of redemptive moment. How dare you challenge God? How dare you interrogate? And I want to put that out there because I want to ask you a question about something that I have found amazingly helpful in my own attempt to take seriously religious existence. Christians, I think, historically, especially in the last 100 years, especially within white evangelicalism, we have gotten really bad at thinking God is an interlocutor available for critique. And yet within certain strains of the Jewish and Hebraic traditions, God is often on the receiving end of critical analysis and interrogation, right? So one of the things I think that Tourniquet gets wrong on this second model is how dare we interrogate? And yet it seems like there are other religious traditions where that interrogation is part of what piety would expect of us. How would you narrate that kind of distinction in the Christian and Jewish traditions?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's central to Judaism. Go all the way back to Abraham in Genesis 18.
Yeah.
Sort of saying, questioning the justice of God, basically saying, if you kill everybody in Sodom, but there's some righteous people there, isn't that unjust? Right. And Abraham sees that he's pushing his luck a little bit, but he, basically gets God to say, okay, look, if there's only 10 righteous people there, I won't destroy the city. But you see that, and then Job, and I think all of the dialogical mood of Jewish reflection. I mean, you don't see what we would identify as like systematic theology, right? Or really even discursive theology in Judaism at all. It's narrative, it's discursive, right? The Talmud's putting all these different views side by side, and they just kind of are sitting there. One of my favorite moments in the Talmud, I can't call the reference off the top of my head, is there's a scene where Moses shows up and starts to try to explain a passage, and the rabbis tell him to be quiet. Right? It's like, no. This is important what we're doing. This process of arguing is central to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think teaching students sometimes who have come from that kind of, look, here's orthodoxy, and your job is to keep your theology buttoned up.
Yeah.
And if your theology gets squishy or off track at all, now you're in danger.
And notice it's if you leave even possible the idea that you could question God, now you almost certainly could question the preacher. Right? Like we got to make sure that's off the table.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole enterprise is about erasing the distinction.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a pastor who used to hold the Bible up in the air, and he would say, when the Bible speaks, God speaks. Okay, well, God's not speaking. You're speaking.
Yeah.
You're the one who's telling me what's in that thing. And so your voice is now God's voice.
I was just at church this week and heard a guy say, it wasn't my regular pastor, but a guest speaker. And he said, preaching the word is non-negotiable. And I thought to myself, well, I can understand what that might mean, right? In the sense that the Christian community has received what they take to be a revelation from the divine, obviously anchoring then your community of worship and your community of service in that revelation makes tons of sense. That would be non-negotiable. I get that. But if one were, I don't know, a Hebrew Bible specialist who showed up, or a New Testament scholar, or a philosopher of religion, and you said, well, which word? Whose interpretation of that word? Which version of that word, right? Suddenly, it's not that there's an interrogation of, oh, this is all garbage because there's questions. It becomes maybe part of what's compelling about these traditions is precisely that it is complicated, ideologically nested, worthy of challenge and critique, and something that is itself reflective of the very communities that participate in its name. Right.
Well, I'm doing a series at a church in Greenville. I just started the last one last Sunday on the question of the reception of the Bible.
Yeah.
And on Sunday, I was making the point. I said, look, the Bible is not a text. It's not a library. It's a textual tradition. It's flowing always.
Yeah.
The term that Brennan Breed uses is nomadic.
That's nice.
And the Bible is a site of conflict always. In the production of the Bible is a site of conflict, and always in translation and all interpretation. And that, it's an object that gets used separate from the things that are in it. But the point is, all of it is negotiation. All of it is in flux. And to the extent that you can't even say the Bible exists, there is no Bible, right? There are biblical things, maybe, but even to say something is biblical is the result of an ideological construction. So I've pulled these texts together. I've pulled those ideas together. I've pulled these characters together and said, that's biblical, right? That's me creating that. And so getting people, and this was a Presbyterian church, USA, fairly, progressive church, relatively speaking. And at the end, somebody goes, yeah, I don't know if you should have tried that at your Baptist church you grew up in. It's like, I think you're right. But I mean, working with students, you want to be able to say to them, look, and this is the point of Job. And I think the point of his speech at the end, God's speech at the end, God doesn't need you to have your theology squared away.
Right.
God is not threatened by your questions.
That's cool.
God is not threatened by your doubts. And if you feel like God needs you to have everything squared away, especially when that ultimately, I think, is a failed endeavor, now you're in a position of just, what is your foundation? How can you survive in this world if that's so much pressure is put on you to get everything right because God needs you to get it right? I mentioned that I'm Reformed. I mean, that's one of the things I love about it. God doesn't need me to do anything. And if that's the case, now I'm free to confront reality. Now I'm free to ask questions, to like go, wait a minute, this thing happened, or I was taught this about people, and then now I met one of those people, and my expectations are being challenged about who they are and what kind of people they are. And so now maybe I need to allow what Job says, I heard, but now I see. Can I allow what I see, what I experience in the world, to challenge what I have heard, the traditions that I've been taught?
I love this move that some friends of mine, Merrill Westfall, Pete Rollins, and others have done, where they will do atheism for Lent. And it's this idea of, what if we, instead of giving up, chocolate or the internet, we gave up the very ideas of God. And I think we talked about this some last week. It's just so cool to think, what would you think of the account of the divine you hold if it were presented to you as an option, rather than just the obvious, right? And I think it's an important exercise. So
that's the choice.
I just because I cannot imagine any podcast in existence right now listening to a lot of Tourniquet. Let's play Tourniquet's track about theodicy on trial. And then I want to come back and talk about what is one of, I think, the most underrated bands that offers a different way forward, but I think does so in such a compelling way as we think about evil in the world. So first, let's listen to this Tourniquet track. You thrash bands or thrash fans, this is some headbanging gold for you.
So we've been doing like an hour and a half. You want to do one more segment?
One more track and then been done.
What's the track you're going to talk about?
I wanted to do Undeceived by Extol. You got one?
No,
all right.
That's fine.
Yeah, if we hit roughly an hour and a half, that should put us, I think, roughly at 2 hours and change.
Right.
Again, if you're watching on YouTube, we'd love to hear from you. Also, you can reach out to us at simmonsphilosopher@gmail.com. And Bryan, your email is?
Bryan.bibb@furman.edu.
So either one. Again, if you've got questions, thoughts, suggestions for future videos, all of our YouTube folks watching this, please do hit us up.
I'm going to drop my video of that class I just taught onto my channel, and then I can link it here. People might want to watch it. I thought it went pretty well.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Yeah. And we'll end today's episode with some other ways you can get in touch with us, because I do think that people finding us this way might be interested in the stuff that we're doing otherwise. So we can maybe end that way. So having just talked about Tourniquet, I think it would be cool to end today's episode by listening to another band that is often associated with kind of Christian metal, though I have question marks and issues with how that category gets deployed. But the band is Extol. Are you familiar with Extol?
No, I'm learning a lot from you today.
Oh my goodness. This band, they're just so good. And the track I want to listen to is Undeceived, a great place to end, I think, today. Now, I should make clear, anybody listening to this, there is zero attempt on our behalf to convince you that thinking about these things should lead you anywhere toward God or religion or Christianity. It's instead just trying to present to you the different flavors that are available within heavy metal and also within the history of ideas, right? And so this track But this band Extol, they are, I think, criminally underrated.
Christian?
They are a Christian band.
Norwegian Christian.
Norwegian Christian.
Okay.
They're in this kind of, so you may be familiar with like the band Horde. I don't know if you know them or not. They were part of the like white metal that was trying to oppose black metal. I like Horde, but they still sound a little bit too much like black metal, and I don't like black metal sound. It's a little too lo-fi for me. But any of you who want to check that out, listen to Horde's "Invert the Inverted Cross." Classic track. There's actually a video on YouTube, I think, of them playing live back in the day. They're all in, like masks and sheets and stuff, and none of them you can see, none of their faces, and it's an interesting band, Horde. If I'm not mistaken, I want to say that like the founder of Horde was actually originally in the Australian band Mortification. You may know them. I might be getting that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's right. But Extol, yeah, Christian Norwegian metal, black metal, I don't think is the right category. I would put it more like, I hear them more in like the Behemoth-y sort of space, more that kind of blackened death metal.
Blackened, right?
Yeah, they're blackened more than black. But I want to look at this track because I think it lands us in a different place than what we've been seeing, right? So we've talked a lot about solidarity, about Satan being used as a kind of metaphor for a kind of freedom, a kind of escape from a certain notion of servitude or exclusion.
Right.
This track is so interesting. So it tells the story of somebody in that kind of misery we just discussed in Lorna Shore, right? She lies in her bed, staring into nowhere, tears running down her face, an open wound bleeding, her body turns pale.
This is a suicide attempt?
It's suicide, right? And so they're talking about that very attempt to embrace the, great luxury of death, this thing, the womb of death. So they're going to twist it differently. And I like where they go. And I think it's worth thinking through. Recalling the road leading away from right, as the dark had appeared as light, tricked to cross the line, dragged further in and trapped in a swirl of wicked lies. Now, no sign of light, no sign of hope. As a dark shadow enters her room, a freezing chill runs down her spine. The presence of death fills the room. And then look where it goes. The shadow encircles her, pale of fear, slowly draining the last drops of life. Her last strength she forces through and cries out to the Lord she used to know. Overwhelming light annihilates the dark. Immediate rest fills her heart. My dear child, come to me. I will restore you and embrace you with my love. Now, this track, again, has that redemptive move at the end, but I think it's an interesting redemption. It's not redemptive in the sense of, oh, you now get it all right.
Yeah, well, she's not being saved.
It's not, and
like living.
And yeah, I mean, like it's clear that she's probably dead as this is in
100% dead.
Right? 100%. And yet it's the story about the guy on the cross next to Christ, who even in the last moment, the idea is that this love does not ever find some limit. It's not too late. Now, you and I might even push further and say, this is part of why ultimately I'm a kind of hopeful universalist. Like I think that this other-oriented love would extend even into eternity or something. But I like the idea that what Extol presents is, hey, it's never too late for you to take yourself up as loved.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
I think that's cool.
That's Judas in the last verse of U2's Until the End of the World.
Oh,
right. It's a song about Judas betraying Jesus.
Yeah.
And at the end, it's like, you turn to the one you tried to destroy, and you said you'd wait to the end of the world. Right. So Jesus is waiting to the end of the world for Judas to turn and ask for forgiveness.
Keep coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah. I there's just something about this that like resonates with me as a parent. This idea that my son can do some stupid stuff. And there might be moments where I still have to be critical and I've got to say, no, man, that's not okay. Right. But I will restore you and embrace you with my love as long as I have breath in my lungs. Right. This idea that the God rejected by so many in these traditions we've been considering might actually be people who've been seduced by power using the name of God in vain. Right. And now what we see with Extol is this idea of saying, no, what if it looks like God is the better name for that solidarity, that kindness, that openness, that welcome, that hospitality, right? maybe there's something there that is, I think, a valuable idea to contrast, not as an alternative to, but a contrast to the way we think about the kind of all we have is solidarity and suffering. It might also be the case that what we do have is genuine love. And I think that's powerful.
You've always got to think about the rhetorical context, right? I don't know much about this band, but if they're in Norway in 2000, they're right in the middle of all that other stuff we were talking about earlier.
There's some churches
right?
being burned. Yeah.
So, and they're using the same idiom, the same music,
Yep.
and the same themes. And I think trying at least to achieve the same level of honesty, but giving people that, oh, wait a minute, that's not all.
Yeah.
There is maybe something that might actually anchor you emotionally or spiritually, and not to say stop singing all your sad death songs, but maybe not yes for sure necessarily, but maybe, just maybe, there's another half verse here.
Yeah.
And I think the rhetorically is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, so hopefully that leads all of you, as we're ending here with this track by Extol, hopefully it leaves you with a sense that the despair that the devil being real might convey, it also is a reminder that the devil being real doesn't mean that death has, in this sense, the final word, right? I love William Barber, this African-American preacher here in the States, who talks a lot about the idea that resurrection is simply the resistance to the idea that the power structure will ultimately kill you. Like that, no. We can still get up even when they think that we've been destroyed. And I think that Extol does an interesting job of at least allowing that counter narrative to be in play. And if we're going to talk about the devil today, I think it's also important to say that rethinking the devil might invite us to rethink God, as Extol does. So let's end today with Extol, Undeceived, and then we'll come back and sign off. So everybody, thank you again. It is such a joy to be able to sit here with my friend and scholar, colleague, the grand poobah himself, Bryan Bibb. It's a joy to think with you, Bryan, as always.
I'm not that much older than you.
I choose to think you are, just because it allows me to choose to think I'm young.
Okay.
An idea that my son daily tells me is false. Every single day. Yesterday, I don't know what I did, but he responded. He was like, "God, you're old."
My son is convinced that I'm bald. He always refers to me as bald. I'm like, I don't know.
You have full head of hair and a beard.
It's a counterfactual. What can I say?
Oh my goodness. Well, this has been so much fun. As we close out today, I want to remind all of you that we are both doing a bunch of stuff in kind of public intellectual ways. And so, Bryan, where's some places that they could find you, could learn more about what you're doing, could, see some of the work that you've put out in the world?
Well, I've got a couple of things in process. So I don't have, my site is not currently up. I don't know. Easiest thing to do, I do have some things on my YouTube channel from before. I put a lot of stuff up during COVID. And every now and then something will go up. And I think this is a good opportunity to start putting more stuff there. Nice. And I've got to get my website up and going. But I mean, mostly just email. Every time sometimes I post on Blue Sky.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm kind of a recluse.
And they can contact you at bryan.bibb@furman.edu.
Sure. That'd be fine.
And that's bryan.bibb at furman.edu, bryan.bibb@furman.edu. And he can follow up with you and give you links to his YouTube channel and some other social media outlets. And as for me, you can go to my website, jaaronsimmons I should say that again. For me, you can find all of my work kind of as a clearinghouse, jaaronsimmons.com. It's got links to my Substack, Philosophy in the Wild. I post twice a week. And in fact, one of my posts every week is about music, though not just about metal. So if you're interested in that, would love to have you be a subscriber there. The paid subscribers get access to the music content. And alternatively, I do have a YouTube channel that I don't post as much to anymore. There's usually about 1 or 2 posts a month. I was used to doing 1 a day, which got way too heavy. But you can check me out there at Philosophy for Where We Find Ourselves on YouTube. If you are watching this on YouTube, it is being streamed at that channel. So while you're there, please hit subscribe. I would love to have you join the community and think deeply about stuff that's really, really hard. I never promise to have any answers, but I will do my absolute best to think through the questions to the best of my ability. So yeah, it's been great to hang with you today, Bryan. Always a joy. And what do you think we should do for our next episode?
I don't know. I mean, I think one idea would be to focus on particular bands.
Yeah.
Another idea would be to focus on a genre. We've been kind of toying with genres,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so like, what's up with Doom?
Ooh,
You know, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, you and I both have been to some Doom shows together, so that might be a lot of fun.
I mean, there's some other topics if you think about, I mean, violence, gender, sexuality kind of issue. This is sometimes very masculine, but not always.
Yep.
You know, so that
I actually think it'd be a cool episode just to do, you know, like women in metal. Yep. And talk about some of the really truly amazing bands that are out there.
Absolutely.
And in fact, a sub kind of episode could be just focusing in on something like Ukrainian metal currently, as a big, you know, middle finger up to the leader of the Russian community currently, who is, I think, representing everything about evil and Satan that we talked about today in all the wrong ways. So yeah, we could talk about bands like 1914 and Ginger and all kinds of cool stuff. Sure. So we would love to hear from you. Again, reach out, Bryan.bibb@Furman.edu, or you can contact me at simmonsphilosopher@gmail.com. Or just go to my website, jronsimmons.com, and it will get you in touch with me. We'd love to hear your ideas, your thoughts, your suggestions, or if you're watching this on YouTube, drop a comment on YouTube and say, hey, I'd love to hear about this or that. And we'll do our very best to try to find a way at least to speak to it, if not do a full episode on your idea. So, Bryan, thanks again.
All right. Thank you, brother.
Awesome. All right. We'll see you guys on the next episode. Horns up. I'll stop this.